People here online now?
Very heavy semesters.
So, yeah, she's been pretty much.
Around, I was like 3 weeks, I was going to Europe to visit the lab, but most of the time I'm here because of the, working, on career wise projects.
That's a little echoey.
Oh, it might be your computer.
Are you computer up?
All right, I like.
There's two unmuted. There's Emily.T.
My computer's not, there's no sound.
Okay.
Okay, one semester.
That's very good, just.
Yeah.
I know Gregory.
Somebody want to stop and hear us? Either in the chat.
Go inside.
We.
This is your first one?
That's fun. He's gonna keep it back. Let's do it. CD.
Hey, Christina, Gina, anybody? Right, in the chat.
Yeah, I'm excited about it and I think it's the right timing.
Yes, we could hear you, but there is a lot of sound coming up in the room.
Yeah, audience. Okay.
There is a lot of sound coming up.
Yeah.
I think mute more than like.
This one has no audio.
I think two Emily questions.
Yeah,
One
this
of
laptop,
Really?
Yeah.
which is no sound.
Yeah.
I mean, this is.
Well, that sounds like you should be on stage.
If you like to like shooting video games. Oh, all right, sure. Yeah.
I gotta hold it. Good, good.
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And those joining via Zoom, thank you very much for joining via Zoom. My name is John Daigle, professor in the School of Forest Resources and academic advisor to Emily Francis. And she'll be sharing her results from her PhD entitled Understanding Private Landowners' Involvement, Knowledge Sharing, and Social Networks in Conservation of Ground Ash in the Face of Emerald Ash Borer. Emily will be briefly sharing some background in just a few minutes. So I thought I'd take an opportunity to share a few introductory remarks. I met Emily in Washington, D.C., literally 5 years to this day. Ironic, but I was at a National Science Foundation meeting that took place May 29th through the 30th. And that's where I first met Emily. And she introduced herself and talked about some of the things we were doing here in Maine, and said she was from New England and was thinking about grad school, and kind of we stayed in touch. And she started her PhD program in the spring of 2020. And I'd just like to say, just, since you've joined 5 years ago, it's just amazing with what things have happened, during that time. It just, it really was an important, I think, moment in terms of some of the graduate work that I do here at the University of Maine. You're one of the key cohort of students who joined Ella and Tyler, but really helped shape the creation of what we call the APCAL Lab at the Ash Protection Collaboration across Wabanaki, with the input of collaborators, but really something that's really kind of grown, looking at it being visible here. So,
You can't believe it.
Oh, it's on for. My sister and her husband have a booth at the Boston Pizza Festival.
I think it's Sheena.
Tell us more.
You can keep going, John.
Yeah. So, part of the visibility of APCA being more recognizable here in our state, but also I think, more at a national and regional level. And that's really, I think, a result of the work that will be presented today with some of Emily's work, but also the many presentations that we've done. And Emily's parents are here today and can be a witness of some of the presentations we gave at the Audubon plant sale a few years ago, Common Ground Fair, other places where you've been supportive and coming to those meetings along with other people to learn more about our work, which is really important. And the other thing I wanted to acknowledge too is I think your unique professional skills in developing relationships and productive collaborative ties with partners, because that's something that helps us really help APCOG grow, is building in these other partners, including the Wild Seed Project, working with land conservation groups, continuing our ties with important collaborators with the Maine Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, who are joining via Zoom, and Les Benedict, who I'm happy to see also joining the call today from Akwesasne Nation, and really helping with the development of the seed manual and the training events that we've done while you've been here. So those are just a few things. We'll learn more about Emily and her work. And thank you for your time here, and we look forward to your presentation today.
Emily, is there any way you can share your screen?
Sure,
On Zoom? Oh. Slides.
Full time I had to.
But you'll be able to see the slides better.
Apologize to everybody online. I thought the whole time that this was shared with you all. And I forgot that. So I want to thank you all for coming today, and thank you for that introduction, John. It saves me from having to read the title of my dissertation. But I will do it anyway. So my name is Emily Francis, and I will be presenting my dissertation titled Understanding Private Landowner Involvement, Knowledge Sharing, and Social Networks in the Conservation of Brown Ash in the Face of Emerald Ash Borer. I first want to read the University of Maine Graduate School's land acknowledgement, which says the University of Maine recognizes that it's located on Marsh Island in the homeland of the Penobscot people, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki tribal nations, the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq through kinships, alliances, and diplomacy. The university also recognizes the Penobscot Nation and other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. So just a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Vermont, but I've lived all over the US, including Iowa, where I attended the University of Northern Iowa for my master's degree, New Mexico, where I worked for US Fish and Wildlife Service, Kenya, where I worked for the National Science Foundation, which is where I met John. I have 2 degrees in geography and consider myself firmly placed as an interdisciplinary social scientist. I come from an immigrant descent, and while my last name is Francis, I am not Wabanaki or Indigenous. I'm very close with my family, and as you can see from my slide, my dogs, knitting, and wool are passions in my life outside of friends, family, and work. And as you can see, Sitka in the very center there is sleeping on my laptop while I write my dissertation, and she's not exactly the best motivator, but she was there. I just want to acknowledge my dissertation committee. My advisor is John Daigle, Bridie McGreevy, Pari, Rahimzadeh, Arahan, sorry, Darren Ranko, and Rachel Chapman. And just an overview of the presentation, I'll be providing summaries for chapters 1, 3, and 4, which are the introduction of EAB, the importance of ash in Maine, the story of the ash seed collection manual, and the social and networking analysis I performed on the ash protection network in Maine. I'll be going into more detail in chapter 2, which is the private landowner study that I conducted. And I'll be finishing off with some concluding statements and final thoughts before acknowledgements, thank yous, and time for questions. So please hold questions until the end. So my first chapter that I'll be talking about is the introduction with background of brown ash in Maine and the introduction of emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer, called EAB, was first detected in North America in 2002 on the US-Canadian border, specifically in Detroit, Michigan, across from Ontario, Canada. In the last 22 years, this very small wood-boring beetle has spread to 36 states and 5 Canadian provinces. What is incredible about this very small invasive forest pest, as you can see on the left here, is the stealth with which it can infest trees without much notice by humans until the infestation is severe. While mated EAB have been observed flying between 3 to over 10 kilometers, it has been proven that human movement of infested ash products, like firewood and nursery stock, are what has spread the species and has now caused the insect to go coast to coast in North America in a short period of time. The middle map shows the range of ash as well as the EAB infestation detections, but the ash is specifically highlighted in green, the ash range. And there are 16 species of ash native to North America. And I think the quote at the top by Herms et al. Really highlights the enormity of this invasive species issue. And it says, in terms of invasive forest pests, EAB may well represent the worst case scenario. The US Department of Agriculture had a federal quarantine in place from about 2003 to 2021, but it was removed due to the infestation being considered beyond control, and management was left up to the individual states after that. Maine is a state that has continued monitoring and updating their quarantine when new detections are found. Maine's first detections took place in 2018 in both the most northern and southern counties. While the northern detection has been slow to spread, the southern population has moved toward the center of the state, and this map shows the most recent ash quarantine zones. You can also see the green in the center map shows the ash range specifically for the state of Maine, and there's still a great portion of Maine's ash that is vulnerable to EAB spread. Looking specifically at brown ash, actually before I talk specifically about brown ash, there are 3 species of ash that are native to Maine: white, green, and brown. White and green are known for their street value and timber value, but brown ash, which is also called black ash, is not considered high timber value, partially due to its difficulty to access in the forest. It's often overlooked due to its ecological niche in wet, marshy areas of the forest and on riverbanks. We like to say that brown ash likes to keep its feet wet and can thrive in those wetter areas, making it difficult to log. And for this reason, it's not often sought out by timber companies. However, it does have a 3-pronged importance: cultural, ecological, and economic. Brown ash is a cultural keystone species of the Wabanaki people who live in the unceded territory geopolitically known as Maine and areas of Canada. Brown ash can be found in different creation stories of the Wabanaki people and is the central material for basket making. And as you can see here on the left, this is a pack basket by Richard Sillaboy of the Mi'kmaq Nation. As I mentioned, brown ash is ecologically important. Its leaves are the last to bud out in the spring, allowing for important sunlight to reach the forest floor. And it's the first to lose its leaves in the fall, breaking down fast into the soil where it is nutrient rich. There are over 70 invertebrate species that depend on brown ash specifically, as well as the species up the food chain who rely on those invertebrates, making it a key species in its own ecological niche that cannot be replaced by any other tree species. Finally, while brown ash is not the first pick of the timber species for logging, it's still used for building and for firewood, making it economically important. For the Wabanaki and Algonquin nations within the range of brown ash, it's very important for the basket making artistry and commerce. And brown ash basket making is also a key part of Maine's rusticator and potato industry histories. So I've addressed the threat and I've addressed what's threatened, and now I will talk to you about options for adaptive management, which is how ash is being managed against EAB. The 4 strategies that are discussed in the chapters of my dissertation discuss seed collecting, which is the first image, silviculture, which is the second, biological controls, the third, and insecticide treatments in the 4th image. The image on the top right refers to the 10 recommendations for managing ash, which was created by some of our Vermont partners in 2020 to highlight these strategies. And I would like to note that research for these strategies and more are ongoing, not only at the University of Maine, but also the University of Vermont, New Hampshire, Michigan State, and genetic research at Pennsylvania State University, as well as with our federal and state partners. A final point is that researching for ash protection in the forest is generally a new line of research, as most previous work had been focused on protecting ash for residential and municipal properties. And there is still much to be learned, and strategies will be continually developed and refined. Moving on to dissertation goals and objectives. The first goal was to inform the direction of outreach and education to sustain brown ash trees for the future. The second, to explore the network of those protecting ash against EAB in Maine and how it can direct the future for this long-term conservation problem. And there are 3 specific objectives which are covered by each chapter of my dissertation. The first is to determine private landowners of Maine understanding for the importance of ash and their intentions in managing ash against EAB. The second is development of a community-focused ash seed collection manual in collaboration with the network of those interested in the protection of ash against EAB. And finally, to create a framework for the network of relationships of those involved with brown ash protection against EAB in Maine, and to address how knowledge is shared by this group and directions for future efforts. So moving into chapter 3, I'm going to be talking about the brown ash seed manual. So how the seed manual came to be. The brown ash has been overlooked prior to the introduction of EAB in North America by Western science. While there are collections and studies of white and green ash galore, brown ash, with its own uniqueness, has not been the focus of extensive research. And as EAB began to show its destruction, basket makers in Michigan alerted members of the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, or MEBA, and MEBA joined with Wabanaki researchers at the University of Maine to discuss the broader issue and what could be done to protect ash in Maine. This group eventually brought in more interested parties and became known as the Brown Ash Task Force. One of the needs brought forth by this group was the creation of an ash seed manual for collecting ash seed documentation on collecting ash seed. At the time, most of the literature was very technical and off-putting to the non-researcher. And that information was spread across many entities, universities, the USDA, US Forest Service, and others. And it became an effort by UMaine researchers to create a streamlined document, which is what chapter 3 of my dissertation is. The outcome of the manual is what I like to call a living document. And while it's a chapter of my work, the actual document is being held by the APCA researchers at UMaine and updated as technology and climate change develop, making this chapter just a static version of what it could become. And it is accessible on the UMaine APCA page, which you can see in the center. This effort was helped enormously by Les Benedict of the St. Regis Mohawk Akwesasne Nation in New York State, who has been studying ash for many years and is the authority on brown ash. He produced a paper with Richard David in the early 2000s, which provided information on planting ash seedlings. And you can see that the title of this paper also in the center. The development of that paper involved community feedback and was developed prior to EAB's initial detection in North America. And I've had the opportunity to visit Les in New York 3 times, and he visited Maine last year to assist in our seed collection trainings. And all of these visits have been invaluable in the creation of this document, and I greatly appreciate his input in teaching. I also want to mention the Wild Seed Project in North Yarmouth, Maine, who have also been very important with this document. I was able to take their seed core intensive class in 2022, and I learned all about native plants, seed collection, and seed sowing. Wild Seed Project has become an important partner with APCA, and I will talk more about them later. So just a little bit more on the actual seed manual. It incorporates ash identification, seed collecting, sorting, storage, provides multiple options of where to send seed after collection. There's a detailed list of items recommended for seed collection, as well as details on choosing where to store seeds. The document was reviewed by the U.S. Forest Service, Maine Forest Service, Wild Seed Project, other university researchers, basket makers, harvesters, among others. It was presented at the seed collection training put on by APCA in 2023. And from those events, a Passamaquoddy seed collection event took place last fall, and there are members of that nation who are looking to create their own nursery. This is all very exciting, and the document itself can be downloaded from the APCA website. I also want to mention that Maine Public Radio was present for one of our seed collection trainings and published an article on the event, which you can read online, and that's also in the center. And the picture is of myself, Tyler Everett, Tom Newell, and McKay Burley from Akwesasne Nation's Environmental Division when we collected seeds in New York in 2022. Tyler is a graduate student in the APCA lab, and Tom is a Passamaquoddy forester. So now I'm going to get into the social networking analysis chapter. The Ash Protection Network in Maine was created before EAB was detected in North America in the 90s due to ash dieback that was prevalent in the region. This group, which was started by the Maine Indian Basket Maker Alliance, or MEBA, as I mentioned, was contacted by Michigan basket makers when EAB was detected and informed of the destruction that was happening with black ash stands in the Great Lakes state. As information and research developed around ash and EAB, the Brown Ash Task Force had 5 meetings between 2009 and 2019, along with regional meetings for sharing and planning regarding EAB. I specifically want to highlight the importance of these state and regional meetings as they brought in key partners into the fold, like Tony D'Amato at the University of Vermont. The Ash Protection Collaborative across Wabanakik, or APCA, was officially created in 2022, and in 2023 held a series of virtual and in-person trainings to educate the public about the importance of ash and the threat of EAB in Maine. And these included our seed collection trainings. So to give a brief, very brief overview of what social networking analysis is, it comes from multiple fields, including social psychology, social anthropology, and sociology, with specific roots in graph theory and network science. SNA addresses groups through nodes or actors, the specific people within a network. And ties are what connect actors to each other. It has many kind of applications, and in the fields of conservation and natural resource management, it has been utilized in stakeholder analysis and participatory natural resource management, looking at the diffusion of knowledge within farming communities, how multiple stakeholders work across borders protecting biodiversity, and how networks manage invasive species. With the research objective in mind, to create a framework for the network of relationships of those involved in brown ash protection against EAB in Maine, I asked these questions. How is knowledge shared within a discrete natural resources network, specifically one initiated in response to an invasive species? How do central actors' connectivity in the network relate to knowledge transfer between other categories? And what is the outlook and effectiveness of future of ash and the efforts taking place by the APCA network? The SNA was administered through Qualtrics, through the University of Maine Qualtrics account, and this is hosted online. There were 33 participants selected to participate. The internal review board at UMaine approved the survey in late 2023, and the survey commenced shortly thereafter following the Dillman et al. Recruitment method via email. I'm providing this figure to highlight the categories which divided participation by their affiliation in the Ash Protection Network. It's important to note that these boundaries were decided by researchers with the assistance of the APCA team. And these individuals were chosen by their involvement with the APCA network, activities, and greater ash protection efforts that they take part in. These categories are federal and state agencies, tribal nations governments, university researchers, private citizens, specifically basket makers and harvesters, and non-governmental organizations or NGOs. On the left, you can see the breakdown of individuals by category. And on the right, you can see section 1 of the survey, which is how each of the actors relates to one another. Do they know each other? And if yes, how long have they known each other? How often do they communicate? And do they communicate with each other regarding the following statements? The rest of the survey included questions on their outlook of the future of ash, strengths and weaknesses in the network, and demographics of each participant. Now, I could spend an entire hour talking only about the SNA results. So I'm going to keep this very, very simple. This is a well-connected network. I used a software called UCNet for analysis, which is a commonly used SNA visualization and analyzing software. The table on the left hits the highlights of the 33 actors. There were a total of 673 ties or connections between actors. The average degree or number of ties between actors was 20, and the density was 0.637, which is the proportion of the number of possible connections between all of the actors. I can go into further detail about some of these measures later if people are interested. The image on the right is the network graph, or the visual representation of the network and how each actor is connected. If you look specifically at the lightest color circles, those are the university researcher locations on the graph. And you can see that they're mostly centered in the center of the graph. Whereas the dark blue circles represent NGO actors, and you can see that there are more on the outskirts of the network. Whereas the other 3 categories are spread throughout the network. So this is just one representation of how people are connected and how the categories work between each other. And it was actually kind of fun to make. So the outlook for the ash protection in Maine. As I mentioned, section 2 of the survey asked questions regarding individuals' outlook and effectiveness of various efforts. Specifically, the existence of brown ash on the landscape for the next 50 years in Maine, which had a mean score of 3.07, which equates to somewhat negative on the 7-point scale. And the use of seed collecting to protect brown ash in the future had a mean score of 6.1, which was in the fairly positive in the response values. Both of the means for the effectiveness of forest management techniques and biological control agents at the bottom had mean scores of 4.38 and 4.69, which are neutral. And there's a lot to be said about these results, specifically coming from the ash protection network. I do want to mention that we in Maine are looking at a future landscape scale devastation of all 3 ash species. So the negative outlook is not necessarily a downer attitude. There is no getting around the fact that there will be serious loss. The hope for the future down the line once EAB there is hope for the future, or I would like to think down the line once EAB has had its first pass through the landscape. But this is just important to recognize that having means that are a little bit lower are people's opinions, but it's just interesting coming from the network who's working on these different efforts. So getting into the discussion points. I don't have time to completely revisit the research questions, but I do want to reiterate that the network is very connected and centralized. And I think it's impressive for a grassroots conservation network focused on a cultural keystone species. There are people who have been in this network or some version of it for almost 20 years. While the data did produce very centralized actors, specifically those in the university category. This isn't a huge surprise because that's where APCA is based at UMaine. The core network members at UMaine are key to the knowledge transfer to the broader network, like connecting geneticists at Penn State, for example. As research is developed, it is the responsibility of APCA to communicate these findings to a broader audience. And the outlook on the whole may not be overly confident or bright, but there is hope. And when the outlook's results are broken down by category, there are definitely some categories that have more positivity than others. Looking at this into the centrality of one category over all the others, Prell et al. Specifically suggests that there's a different kind of analysis approach that could be done, which is called structural equivalence, rather than looking at centrality. To further understand the network, I think that this would be a great option to try to better understand the relationships beyond just centrality measures, which is really the most common methodology for analyzing these sorts of networks. There are definitely concerns by individuals about the future of ASH and ongoing efforts, and this should also be a direction of focus for the future of the work. Perhaps the network should have a focus group session to look at future efforts because of the differences in opinions across what we found in the network with this study. Finally, I'm interested in how the network will handle changes of central actors leaving due to students graduating or people changing positions. And actually, while writing this paper, there has been staffing changes, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out for everyone. So finally, I'm going to go into more detail with this chapter in particular, but this is what I like to call private landowner study. So as the story of EAB and its arrival in Maine has already been covered, I'm going to focus on ownership of Maine's land, which is key to the overall protection of ash. Maine is 94% privately owned, which is a stark contrast to our western states where large swaths of land are federally or publicly owned. Conservation on those lands are handled very differently, whereas agencies and researchers in the East have to connect with many landowners to address a problem like ash production. With such a small amount of public land, the patchwork of privately owned land means that statewide conservation efforts must have buy-in from a diverse group of stakeholders. These include corporations, family forest owners or FFOs, land trusts, municipalities, tribal nations, and others. And this is what we talk about when we say landscape level management. As many landowners as possible need to be involved for large scale protection versus simply protecting the street trees in towns and cities, which for the most part, when it comes to ash, what has been done in a lot of states, really just focusing on the street trees. So we in Maine are really interested in a landscape level protection. So moving into the survey design and recruitment, I used the involvement theory methodology, which was developed by Zakowski and modified by Daigle et al., which is a 2019 paper. The survey was reviewed by APCA and partners and approved by the UMaine's Institutional Review Board in 2021. The recruitment methodology, like the SNA study, was modeled after the Dillman method, 2014. But we provided options for organizations we partnered with so they could choose how they wanted to share the surveys within their networks. We worked with 11 organizations and the survey was advertised to over 25,000 email addresses. And these are the 11 organizations, the type of media release, the approximate number of people these messages were sent to, and how they followed the Dillman method. And as you can see, we worked with a broad range of organizations from the Maine Bureau of Parks and Land, who actually approached us. They're the ones with the 25,000 email addresses. They approached us after seeing the survey shared through the Maine Forestry listserv. So that was very, very exciting to have that shared to a much larger audience. But we also had groups like First Light Learning Journey and even MOFGA's Low Impact Forestry. Most of the survey was shared via email or media blurbs that we drafted and shared with these organizations. So getting into the survey itself, it was broken into 5 sections. The first collected background information about the landowner, the land they own, acreage, knowledge of ash, and more. The second section focused on methods of involvement theory, including EAB awareness and the belief statements. Section 3 was not included in the scope of the research that I'm presenting today, but it did ask landowner knowledge about brown ash and its importance with wild agriculture. The 4th section asked about knowledge and interest for the adaptive management strategies, and the final section asked questions about landowner demographics. So getting into the adaptive management strategies. Now that we've covered the landscape, let's talk about the types of management that are possible to protect ash. And here we specifically talk about 6 management strategies, 2 of which are silvicultural strategies that private landowners could potentially take part in that we highlight in this research. First, to participate in EAB monitoring to assist in detection efforts, to allow for seed collection on their property, consider insecticide treatments for ash on the property, consider taking part in the state program to allow for the release of biological control agents called biocontrol, which are 4 species of parasitic wasps, and to identify sites to reserve ash trees of different size classes ahead of EAB. There's also another one at the bottom, which is a plan to harvest all or the majority of merchantable ash ahead of EAB. And while this is an option, it's not what we recommend, as it removes the seed source from the landscape, which cannot be replaced. It is important to understand that once the tree is harvested, that's one less source of genetic material for the natural seed bank, the forest floor, but also for us to harvest for research, storage, and for living seed banks. While the short-term monetary value may be important for the landowner, we want to stress the long-term value of keeping healthy trees on the landscape for as long as possible. They may have some resistance to EAB and provide important research to protect ash in the long run, and if it's gone, it's gone. However, this management strategy is included in the survey because we would really like to know how many people are actually interested in taking part in that one. So moving into the theoretical framework. From the first objective of this dissertation, we want to know what private landowners know about ash and their intention on managing ash to protect against EAB. Understanding and predicting the behavior of forest landowners to protect ash trees are critical in assessing the likely effectiveness of the proposed adaptive management strategies. For this reason, involvement theory and expectancy value model was used in constructing a context and assessing the strengths of beliefs about the relationship between EAB and the adaptive management strategies, as these variables ultimately influence attitudes and behaviors of private landowners, as well as assessing the intentions and private landowners' understanding in regard to ash management and protection, as their decisions affect the landscape and spread of EAB. The involvement theory utilizes a person's negative or positive reaction to a statement regarding a specific issue like EAB and how it affects their property. We use that to create an index, which allows researchers to gauge their attitudes or beliefs toward actions they may take. These potential actions highlight the involvement or the likelihood of taking action on a specific issue. And using this involvement index that we created, we tested the strength of a set of belief statements regarding EAB and ash to see how they might vary by involvement level. The expectancy model on the right identifies antecedents to the levels of involvement. And this allows researchers to examine the perspectives of private landowners in Maine regarding forest management and EAB to the extent of their engagement with their land. Involvement theory methods discussed here stem from Zukowski 1986, which outlines the frameworks containing the antecedents of involvement, the involvement, and the possible results of involvement. The key to this theory is that the more effort, time, caretaking, and other behaviors a person, object, or situation might have, the more likely there is for high involvement. An individual's personal factors, their needs, important interests, and values, along with object or stimulus factors and situational factors, will all interact with involvement of an issue or an object for an outcome of a possible result of involvement. This theory was developed in marketing and advertising, where researchers focused on consumers becoming involved with a product or service and the likelihood of spending time and money. It has been utilized in artificial intelligence, where consumers shop through smart speakers, strategies and development for branding, advertising in travel blogs, biosecurity at national borders, and firewood movement for forest pests and campers, which is the Daigle et al. Study for 2019 and was crucial in the methods employed for this study. Looking specifically at the methodology, the private landowner involvement with EAB was assessed using a 5-point scale for 5 statements. The value selected by the participant indicates their agreement with positivity or negativity of each statement. And this was adapted from Mattal's 1995 personal involvement inventory, which is similar to the Daigle 2019 methods in the camper belief study. These statements began with the definition of invasive species, which statement followed the same scale, and each statement followed the same scale, 1 being the most negative and 5 being the most positive. The value of each response was totaled for an overall number between 5 being the lowest involvement and 25 being the highest involvement. In testing for reliability, Cronbach's alpha was used to indicate the internal consistency for the levels of involvement. Moving to the belief statements, these were used to gauge landowners' understanding of EAB threat and the future of this issue. Some of these statements are, there's not much a landowner can do to prepare for the impacts of EAB. As long as EAB continues to spread through my state, my efforts to sustain ash are useless. EAB threat is exaggerated, and other tree species can fulfill environmental roles of ash trees. Each of these statements were answered with a 5-point bipolar scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Along with each of the adaptive management strategies, the participants of the surveys were asked if they would be interested and might consider, plan to, have done, or are not interested in each of those 6 adaptive management strategies. And then they were also asked how influential these following social and economic factors would affect their participation in these adaptive management strategies. And these include fitting with the long-term management goals of the land. They think the practice is likely to succeed, as well as the economic returns of the practice, just to name a few. And they were asked to rank these also on a 5-point scale from extremely influential to not at all influential. So for the data analysis, like I said, the data was collected and housed in Qualtrics and analyzed in Excel and SPSS. Some of the analyses used were cross-tabulation, one-way ANOVA with a post-hoc Tukey test, and chi-squared. Getting into the results section, we had 602 total responses. And for the analysis, we decided to focus on landowners with over 10 acres of mostly intact forest land. And they had to have completed the involvement theory questions, which left 362 respondents. And I realize I didn't make a note of this, but the response rate for this was almost impossible to quantify because we don't have the exact number of people who were introduced to the survey to be able to decide if they want to take it, especially where the Maine Bureau of Parks and Land sent it to over 25,000 people. We only heard back from 600. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. So those who did not meet the criteria and were not part of the 362 either didn't have enough land, forest, or didn't answer the involvement theory questions. So within the 362 participants, the age range was between 26 and 88. Over 62% of the respondents identified as male, with 21.5 as female, and the remainder either did not respond, preferred not to respond, or identified as non-binary. 80% of respondents identified as white for race, and less than 2% as American Indian or Native Alaskan. And this follows pretty well with Maine's demographics in the US Census. So we feel that this is a decent representation of the state of Maine in this survey. Getting into the results of land ownership and types of landowners, we see that only over 90% of the landowners owned in our survey of the 362 respondents between 10 and 999 acres, with only 12 participants owning more than 10,000 acres. The largest category of landowner type was family forest at 88.7%, and the second largest was trust land at 9.9%. Overall, this is similar with the National Woodlands Owner Study by the U.S. Forest Service for Maine woodland owners. And it's important to note that there are other types of landowners, and we need feedback from as many as we can get. While the proportion of the landowners in this study largely were family forest owner, this was not specifically a family forest owner research study, so we were glad to see that there was at least some diversity in the sample overall. So moving on to ash presence and EAB awareness. The top table represents landowners' response for what species of ash they have, do not have, or are unsure if they have on their property. The column for yes, I have ash. Oh, no. I like that. The column for yes, I have ash, which is the second column here, correlates well with the abundance of each species on the landscape, with white ash being the most common, then brown, and finally green ash. It is important to note that the percentages for I don't know or are unsure is large for brown ash and green at 39.2% and 53%, but only 22.7% for white ash. Turning to EAB awareness, which is the table on the bottom, 98.3 participants had heard of EAB. And this is great news for the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, Forestry, and the University of Maine, both entities who have worked so hard on educating the public. And of those who had heard of EAB, at the time in 2022, when the survey was taken, only 5.5 reported EAB damage. So looking at the overall levels of involvement, there were 4 levels: low, medium, high, and very high. And as you may remember, the statements regarding EAB were added in numerical value for each response for each person and added together for a total. The higher the total, the higher the involvement level. The lower the total, what we assume is less involved. The Cronbach's alpha for this was 0.78, an acceptable magnitude for internal reliability. Similar to the methodology used by Zakowski, Beswell et al. 2012 and the Daigle et al. 2019. These categories were determined by exploring the distribution of the involvement scores and assessing the ratings needed to obtain those scores. SPSS originally created 4 levels of equal interval, and we adjusted the levels to reflect a more accurate summation of the levels, particularly because of the high number of participants in the levels of high and very high. Very high was the largest level with 104 respondents, which was 28.7% of the sample. So this says at the top, landowners' level of involvement and belief statements. Moving on to the involvement levels, results is addressing the means with the belief statements. Respondents rated their agreement with the 7 statements regarding the threat and severity of EAB and ash replacement in the forests. These ratings were analyzed alongside with their involvement level. Generally, respondents with low involvement had significantly different perceptions of these belief statements than their counterparts with the higher levels of involvement. Respondents with very high involvement were more likely to align by strongly agreeing with statements where there was a possibility to protect ash and work against EAB, whereas those with low involvement were more likely to strongly disagree with statements regarding the future of ash against EAB. Broadly, negative beliefs coincided with low involvement and positive beliefs with high involvement. However, there is uncertainty in the future regardless of involvement level. We also didn't see a difference in involvement level of landowners. Of the 7 statements, 3 proved to be statistically significant, which are the ones that I highlighted. Landowners with very high levels of involvement had much stronger disagreement with the statement, in the long run, things will balance out with EAB, than landowners with low involvement. Finally, landowners with a level of involvement higher than those with low involvement or more strongly disagreed that the EAB threat is exaggerated, meaning that those with low involvement have less concern for the future of EAB than those with high involvement. The following statement, the EAB threat is exaggerated and other tree species can grow in place of ash trees and provide the same or increased value, have similar significance, where low involvement respondents have more agreement with the statements than subsequent levels. Those with higher levels disagree with EAB being exaggerated, and that other species can replace ash for the same or increased value. These results, the differences between the mean level, these results, the differences of means between levels were expected, specifically that higher levels of involvement would align with the following responses: that the threat of EAB is not exaggerated, that there is no tree species that can fulfill the same involvement roles as ash. I apologize, these tables are very dense. The adaptive management responses, the respondents were provided with a question along with each of the 6 adaptive management strategies. Of all these strategies, seed collection had the highest overall interest, with 99.1% of respondents responding positively. The silviculture strategy of harvesting all or most of the merchantable ash had the least positive response, with 73.5%. And the majority of those.
You might want to just mention what the top.
I just realized I can see those. Yes, thank you, John. I don't know if there's a way to fix that. Oh. So the top,
Should be able to slide it down.
Yeah.
You select it and just.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Good,
magical,
good, good.
okay.
And just what's, yeah, there you go.
Okay, my apologies. So the first column is adaptive management strategies. The second are if they're saying, yes, they're interested, or no, they're not interested. The number of participants who answered each of those, as well as the percentages. And then the following columns are, I have done, I plan, I am interested, or I might consider. Let's see here. So 99.1% of respondents were positive towards seed collection. The harvesting all or most of merchantable ash had the least positive response, with 73.5%. And the majority of those respondents said that they would only consider this strategy at 47.1%, which is the top yellow box all the way to the right. Chemical treatments or insecticides also had a lower positive response, with 75.7%. The strategy with the highest number of responses who have already done this was to participate in a monitoring program, with 11.1%. Overall, people are very interested in learning more about these strategies, and that's really exciting. Perfect. So we only have 2 tables left. Moving on to the top reasons why respondents would select a strategy. There are 3 options for this response: to maintain existing forest conditions, to restore past forest conditions, and to change the forest conditions to allow other trees to replace ash. And then there's a 4th option, which is other, which is where if people could write in something if they wanted to. Overall, the highest percentages for each strategy, the top reason was to maintain existing forest conditions, which is great. That means keeping ash on the landscape. Except for those responding to plan to harvest all or the majority of merchantable ash, which those respondents had a lot to say. Of the 90 responses written for other, one of the major concerns was losing the monetary or utility value of ash when EAB is present on their property. And these values include using ash for firewood or timber sales, But there's also concern about the loss of EAB if EAB has access to ash first, so trying to beat EAB to the punch. Participants also had used the opportunity to harvest ash to slow EAB or stop the spread of EAB that was written in as a response. Unfortunately, this is removing ash from the landscape is not a method to slow or stop the spread of EAB. However, from responses by participants, this is still believed by landowners to be a viable strategy. It's an old and outdated information and something that our partners and APCA have been working hard to dispel. And the social and economic influences for landowner participation. The final set of results to address are these influences. And this is a large table with a lot of options. So I'm going to highlight what was overall most influential, which are that the strategy fits in with the long-term management goals, that they think the practice is likely to succeed, that other landowners have done this successfully, that the practice will serve as a demonstration, as well as the cost of the strategy and the cost share funding availability to take part. So in conclusion, okay, what we found. Firstly, only a portion of the respondents actually lived within the Maine ash quarantine at the time of the survey in 2022. So regardless of where landowners lived and EAB was present, there was high interest. Second, landowners are interested in keeping ash on the lands that are interested in the landscape species-wise, staying the way it currently is, regardless of management strategies on the whole. Thirdly, of the 6 strategies, allowing for ash seed collection was the most popular, and the plan to harvest all or the majority of ash was the least, although over 70% is still popular. Fourth, the influential and social economic factors to take part in these strategies were mainly financial, that landowners want cost sharing and to know the cost of these strategies up front, as well as the confidence in the practice. They want to see examples from others and become demonstrations themselves. And looking towards the future, formal inventories of ash need to take place to figure out what strategies are appropriate for that land. Not all strategies are options for each landowner, and the first step in the process is inventorying what they already have. Another step is to get buy-in from the forestry community to promote the strategies proposed. And these are the individuals who will be talking with and making the recommendations to landowners. Thankfully, this is being addressed in Tyler Everett's work, so stay tuned for his future dissertation and defense. Finally, there is a need to understand more than just involvement or interest. We need to know if landowners are actually going to take part in these strategies. So one option is surveying the population again, but with a different approach like the theory of plan behavior. If you'd like to hear more about the theory of plan behavior, you can also listen to Tyler Everett's defense. So we made it through all of those tables. And now, conclusion, partner conversation and next steps. So I just want to revisit the overall goals and objectives. Chapter 2, we determined private landowner involvement with potential adaptive management strategies, as well as factors that may influence their ability to participate in those strategies. In Chapter 3, an ash seed collection manual was produced, providing step-by-step instructions in non-technical language for how to identify, collect, ship, and store ash seed for short and long-term storage. The manual was a part of a number of events in 2023 by APCA and other organizations, which I will elaborate on next. And for Chapter 4, identified and analyzed a core group of participants in the APCA network from 5 different categories, highlighting those who are conduits of information transfer and addressing the needs for future directions of this network. So I'd like to briefly mention the collaboration with the Wild Seed Project, which is an NGO based in North Yarmouth, Maine, and focuses on returning native plants to the Maine landscape. And they've been a great partner with APCA. I spoke with Nell Hode, the manager of educational programs during the winter to learn about how they used the seed manual in 2023. Wild Seed Project worked with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute to bring the ash seed manual in a curriculum form to 12 middle school classrooms in southern Maine. And they took the students to local land trusts and used the ash inventory manual, which was produced by Tyler Everett and can also be found online, as well as the seed collection manual, where they inventoried, collected, and processed ash seeds. The students really enjoyed this topic and wanted to know more about what they could do to help ash. In 2024, there are plans to incorporate more classrooms into the effort. Nell said that she's curious for a Wild Seed Project to connect schools directly to land trusts, to find out how to center Wabanaki voices in telling the story of ash for education, as well as what it means to focus on a species that will have landscape level mortality. I also got to know Nell and the rest of the Wild Seed Project when I took their Seed Corps Intensive in 2022, and that experience greatly helped in the creation of the seed manual, and I have really enjoyed working with the Wild Seed Project ever since. So just a couple of future directions for research, highlighting each chapter. For chapter 2, I think it would be interesting to continue with the data that was already collected, specifically the survey data of landowners' cultural awareness of ash. I would also be interested in trying a different theory with this sample, like the theory of planned behavior. However, the involvement theory would still be helpful to repeat, as EAB has spread to so many more counties. It's actually in 14 of the 16 counties in the state now. So it would be interesting to see what landowners are thinking about adaptive management strategies, decisions which are being made now. And it would be interesting to see if people are changing their involvement and beliefs in this process. In chapter 3, I'd be interested in creating a larger manual that encompasses other culturally important species, but this would need to be in partnership with tribal nations to focus and highlight their needs and interests. It would also be interesting to work with partners to explore avenues to incorporate the manual into educational settings, and Wild Seed Project is doing a great job with that. It would be fun to see if we could incorporate or expand that even further. Chapter 4, this is a really interesting network. It's the first time I've done a SNA, and the literature calls for a more mixed method approach, which would incorporate interviews with the network being surveyed. And I think this would be a great opportunity to incorporate Indigenous research methods like two-eyed seeing to tell the greater story of the network, and to use Indigenous research methods to center Wabanaki voices in focusing the direction of future actions. So I'd like to take a moment for acknowledgements and thanks. My whole dissertation is dedicated to Barbara and Myron Francis, who are my grandparents who I miss deeply, and have been my guiding stars through this whole degree. And I miss them dearly. I'd like to thank the APCA team, specifically Ella and Tyler, all of our APCA partners, Richard Soloboy, Nate Seegert, Les Benedict, all of the people at Wild Seed Project, Dr. Rachel Chapman, who really walked me through the SNA there at the very end, along with Sarah Delaney-Studer, and Jed Wright, who was a very dear mentor of mine with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who has since passed on. And I also want to thank my family and friends. I'm very, very close with my parents, my brother and his family, Christina, Ann, Christine and Pat, and all of their dogs, Molly, Mike, and lastly, my wonderful fiance and rock, Wayne, our lovely child, Gianna, and Sig and Sitka, who have been with me through every moment of writing this, and Sig was with me through my comps, and I could not have gotten through without him. I also want to make sure that I highlight all of our APCA partners, all of the wonderful work that's being done at all of these organizations. There's going to be a big brown ash meeting in October, and a lot of these folks are going to be present. So if you're going to be in Maine, October 8th and 9th, 8th and 9th, that's going to be an excellent meeting here at UMaine. And if you're interested in the seed collection manual, that is online. If you have any questions beyond this question section, feel free to email me. And thank you.
Questions? Is there any questions in the chat?
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay.
If you're online and would like to ask a question but don't want to say it out loud, feel free to put it in the chat. That's being monitored by our stellar Ella McDonald. My niece is also named Stella, so that all got picked.
There's a lot of people saying great job.
Well, thank you. Anybody in the room have a question? Thumbs up. That's exciting.
Right.
Actually, I have a question. Can I ask something? This is Brenda Carpenter. Emily, it sounded amazing. Thank you for inviting me to this. Just a really interesting question. I don't know if you can share this based on confidentiality and things, but you mentioned a correlation between folks who showed less involvement and then also who thought that the threat of the EAB was exaggerated. And I'd be really interested in what are the demographics of that group? Just, you know, as a social scientist myself, right? Like, what were those, who are those people? I mean, I would have my own ideas without seeing your data, but I'd be really curious to know what you had on that.
So we didn't break down a lot of that into the data that was reported so much in the paper. And funny enough, this was the only question I got at the one conference I presented this at. And I also said, yeah, that would be really interesting, but that's not what we're reporting on. So that's definitely something that people are gonna ask, obviously, and I should definitely go back and look into a little bit further. The demographic questions that we asked are really age, education level, what state they lived in. And I didn't talk about it a whole bunch here, but most of the people taking this survey were in Maine. There had been a point at the very beginning of creating the survey of trying to see if people were handling EAB differently who are living out of state but owned land in Maine, and that we just didn't get enough data for that. So unfortunately, I don't have a succinct answer for you on that. But that's definitely something I'm gonna play with with the data, just out of personal curiosity. I think that would be interesting. So I can get back to you on that. It's nice that you attended. I really, really appreciate that.
They also thought COVID-19 was exaggerated.
Thank you, Darren.
They just don't believe in the effect
Yeah,
of this.
it could be the same demographic. Yeah.
Just have one question. Long time listener, first time caller. What's the outlook as far as future participation and funding for this type of research?
I mean, that's a really great question. The funding looks good. We, the APCA team, or maybe it's not APCA specifically, but we've gotten some funding for some postdocs to do some work. We're increasing engagement with partners over the border in Canada. There's researchers at Laval and some directly over the border. The Canadian National Seed Bank is actually in Fredericton, which is right over the border from Maine, and we're working with them too. So while I don't have specific numbers on funding, it looks good, and as it's spreading in the state, I think people are becoming more involved, and there is going to be more of a call for what do we do with all these dead trees in our yard? That is upcoming for sure. Yeah.
Well, the farm bill question, I mean, it would be and if a next administration could impact funding through the
True.
farm bill, which has been a key in the most recent 5 years.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything about?
I mean, I'm not going on information. No, I'm not saying this year. I'm thinking more in a large change in philosophy in the federal government.
Sure.
That could happen in next year.
And I was telling somebody, my family earlier, like, the University of Maine actually has, the mall in front of the library is actually lined with ash trees. And university doesn't really have a plan other than to cut them all down, and that would change the face of what Mainers know UMaine as, having those trees right outside the library. So I'm hoping that as it gets closer, maybe we can get the university to work on inoculating some of those trees. That'd be really, really exciting. We don't want to lose those from our campus. I think that would be a huge hole in our campus.
Just put the elms back.
Oh, yes. Long time listener, second time.
No, it's just.
Oh, you're great.
Christine has her hand raised. Christine, if you wanna.
Go ahead, Christine.
Hi, Emily. Great job. I have a million questions, but I will limit them. My main questions were for the seed collection project and like the nursery efforts for ash. I was just wondering if there's any results already on kind of how successful or effective it is for planting and harvesting new ash trees and kind of what that effort looks like.
Sure, that's a great question. Ash seeds take a while to germinate and grow, especially if you're going to do it naturally, like out in the forest floor. We have collected seeds 2 years ago in New York State when there was a mass seed year. And we have reports from the people who have planted those seeds right after that, Wild Seed being part of that group, that those are starting to, some of those are now seedlings. So that's really exciting. There have been other groups that we're involved with that have had successful ash nurseries, but some of those are a couple decades old. So I don't have a whole lot of information on hand about the success rates of germination or anything like that, but we are working very closely with University of Maine, Fort Kent, and that's Dr.
Neil Thompson.
Neil Thompson, and he is very, very excited about the ash seedlings that he currently has popping up in Fort Kent. So it's all looking pretty good, but I don't have any like actual at the moment.
Cool. Well, it sounds like that's on the right track and hopefully there's some good success there. And then my only other initial question was, you talked about the kind of need for private landowner inventory and just kind of like seeing what they actually have on their land. And I guess I was wondering if there was any component of the survey or maybe even just anecdotal data about like their willingness to participate in something like that. Like, do you have any idea of whether or not private landowners that own, you know, that 10 to 999 acre majority, like how willing they'd be to have an inventory done or participate in something like that?
That's really interesting. I never actually really considered that as part of the survey. We have certainly talked a lot about the inventory that was written. That was Tyler's master's, essentially his master's thesis. It would be really interesting to note, we do have groups. The WAYS program here at UMaine has done a lot of inventory more on tribal land. And that would really be a great way to also get students out on the land, to have people go out and survey private landowners' land. So that would be a really exciting avenue for future efforts. But unfortunately, that wasn't a part of the survey. But thank you, that was a really good question.
Yeah, it sounds like a potential citizen science project in the making. Good job. Love you.
Thank you, love you too.
Any other questions? On the chat? What's that?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you, Emily. So thank you all for joining via Zoom. Really appreciate you joining today. So we're going to close out kind of the public presentation part of this defense. And so we're going to go into more of a committee member questioning for Emily and then deliberate. and let Emily know how well she did. So at this stage, thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone online. I'm gonna leave now.
And those in the room, you probably need to leave, but we have a short break.